Hello again, 8th graders. This is Chapter 3-2B Revisited, another lesson over graphing equations. Remember that you need to choose your x-coordinates, and you have to keep in mind the size of the grid you are given. Some of you found that out the first time in Lesson 3-2B, that perhaps you can't even choose two negative points, or you can't choose two positive points. In today's lesson, though, I would really like for you to think about that coefficient of x in the y equals mx plus b, and in particular, whether or not it's a positive number or a negative number. Let's look at example 1. Example 1 says y equals 1/4 x plus 2. Now, some of you were having some trouble the other day with that. When it says to take 1/4 times x, that really means to take x divided by 4, because I have told you before in 7th grade math that to multiply by 1/4 is the same thing as dividing by 4. Think about taking half of a candy bar. Isn't that the same thing as cutting it into 2 or dividing it into 2 and taking one part? So really, multiplying by 1/4 is dividing by 4. That means you want to be very careful to choose your x-coordinate to be a multiple of 4 so that you can work with whole integers rather than rational numbers like a 2.5 or a 3.25. Always, my recommendation is to start where x is 0. 1/4 times 0 is going to be 0, and 0 plus 2 is 2. I'm going to choose 4. 1/4 of 4 is 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. Then I'm going to go out a little bit on a limb, and I'm going to pick 12. 1/4 of 12 is 3, and 3 plus 2 is 5. Then I'm going to choose -4, because 1/4 of -4 is -1, and -1 plus 2 is 1. Then I'm going to choose -12 and see if I can get it on the grid. 1/4 of -12 is -3. -3 plus 2 is -1. So I'm going to graph my 0, 2, my 4, 3, and my 12, 5, -4, 1, and -12, -1. And that one's going to be a little difficult on these grids because the -1 line is missing. Now, what I want you to notice is that the coefficient of x is a positive 1/4. Look what your line, or how your line is rising. It is literally coming from quadrant 3 and extending up through quadrant 1. We say that we can walk up a positive sloped line. We can walk up the line. That is very typical if your coefficient of x is a positive number. Let's move on to example 2. In example 2, the first thing I want you to notice is take a good look at that equation and tell me, say it to yourself, I'm not there to hear you, sorry. Is my coefficient of x going to be a positive number or a negative number? Yes, this one is a -1, and we're going to see how that changes the slope, the direction of the line. We're going to start where x is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. I am going to pick 6. Now, 6 times -1, or I can think of it as taking the opposite of 6, would be a -6. And negative 6 plus 1 is going to be negative 5. Now, if you need to do a little figuring underneath that function table, there's nothing wrong with that. It helps you get them right. Then I'm going to pick 12. And I'm going to have negative 12 plus 1. That's going to be a negative 11. I am going to choose negative 6. Now, the opposite of negative 6, or negative 6 times negative 1, is going to be positive 6 plus that 1 equals 7. Now, if I do a quick mental math, and if I pick negative 12, I'm going to get a 13. So I'm going to switch it to a negative 10. The opposite of negative 10 is 10, or negative 10 times negative 1 is positive 10, plus 1 gives me 11. Now I'm going to graph 0, 1, 6, negative 5, 12, negative 11, negative 6, 7, and negative 10, 11. Look what has happened to the direction of the line. This is a negative coefficient of x, and notice that now my line is basically in quadrants 2 and in quadrants 4. When that coefficient is a negative number, I'm going to be walking, or if the line is steep enough, I will literally be sliding down that line. At this point, I would like for you to hit pause, go on and do examples 3 and 4. Before you begin, ask yourself, am I going to have a line that goes upward toward my right that I can walk up, or am I going to have a line that goes down toward my right that I have to walk down or slide down? And then I will show you how they're done. Let's see how you've done. I hope you realize that with example 3, you were going to get a line that you could walk up because the coefficient is positive. You may have chosen different numbers, but I put in all the significant dots or points that should be on the line for example 3. Pause if you need to. I'm moving on to number 4. Here again, I decided to choose positive and negative x's that weren't exactly the same. But again, I put in the significant points that you could possibly get. And I hope you realized before you started graphing this line that the coefficient of x is negative, so you were going to get a line that you could walk down. And hopefully this will help you get a little better at graphing linear equations or linear functions. And this is Scoutin' Out.